let's make a start. Welcome to IMUC-III. My name is Tim Stinear. I'm a Professor of Microbiology here at the University of Melbourne at the Doherty Institute. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to IMUC-III, the third International Mycobacterium ulcerans Conference. And I especially welcome our distinguished guests for this opening session, the Honourable Mary-Ann Thomas, Minister for Health, Health Infrastructure and Ambulance Services here in Victoria, and our Chief Health Officer, Dr Clare Looker, and the Dean of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences, Professor Jane Gunn. To colleagues and friends, Memoache, Guten Tag, Hola, Bonjour, Konnichiwa, Salam Alaikum, Ekaro, Mbote, hello, hello, and g'day. We are 130 registered attendees, which is not bad for a neglected tropical disease, from 12 countries around the world. And a special shout out to those that have travelled from West Africa. It is not easy to get here, or the other way, from West Africa. You will be tired today, you'll be tired tomorrow. But I feel your pain, and stick with us, and we will hope we will reward your endurance. So you know a disease is neglected if there have only ever been 2 previous international meetings on the subject. But that's actually not true, and over the last 2 decades at least, the WHO has hosted annual and biannual meetings on Buruli ulcer that have really helped the field come together to advocate for the issues around this disease, better treatments, better control mechanisms, understand how it's spread. And as you'll hear later on today, the WHO have tried to make that voice even stronger by uniting all neglected tropical skin diseases under one umbrella. But more on that later from our Dr Kingsley Asiedu. So these meetings, as I say, have played a critical role in helping us unite and advocate for Buruli ulcer. But let me begin IMUC-III by acknowledging country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, and this is the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples. We recognise the unique place held by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the original owners and custodians of the lands and waterways across Australia, with the histories of continuous connection dating back more than 60,000 years. We acknowledge their enduring contribution to caring for country, and we pay respect to elders, past, present, and any Indigenous peoples here today. We also acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy. Now, I just wanted to say a few more things about, we were actually hoped to have a Wurundjeri elder here to welcome you to country. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to happen. So I'm just going to spend another couple of slides acknowledging the contribution of the Wurundjeri to our lives. So a few slides. So this is an aerial photograph of the Melbourne University campus where we are at the moment. And if I just turn around and point, we are somewhere here. And this is looking to the CBD and the Port Phillip Bay area that some of you hopefully will have a chance to explore. This is Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country. Now, if we just change the view and go back to the 1860s, and this lithograph describes a scene on Merry Creek where we see local people, a scene from daily life. There is a tree, a large tree in this image. It's a manna gum. Now, that's significant because the Wurundjeri get their name from this tree. In Wurundjeri language, this tree is the warren. And this tree holds a food, a grub of a moth called the jerry. And the Wurundjeri people were known as the witchetty grub people because they used the warren and the jerry as their sources of food and nutrition. Now, this is an interesting image because it actually invokes a One Health theme. It tells us that the Wurundjeri people were intimately connected with the environment, with animals, and with their health. And I wonder if we had been a little bit more alert to this way of thinking, to this Wurundjeri way of knowing about how connected we are between the food and the animals that provide that food and our environment, if we may have got to solving the Buruli ulcer transmission enigma a little bit sooner. Because as you'll hear today, Buruli ulcer is a One Health issue, and this connection between environment and animals around us is key to how we get Buruli ulcer. Okay, so food for thought there. Now, I'm just going to leave you with some, before I hand over to the Honourable Minister for Health, Marianne Thomas, to open IMUC-III, some guiding principles and a couple of housekeeping things. I would like us, now this image is IMUC-II. These are the delegates from IMUC-II, and I'll come back to this image in the next slide. I want us to share our knowledge generously. Conferences work when we share our knowledge generously. I want us to listen willingly. 20 years ago at IMUC-II, or 26 years ago at IMUC-II, was embarrassingly, I think, hubristic. I wish I had more humility, but anyway, that's another story. So listen willingly, critique constructively but gently. Yes, and there's more to say on that, I guess. Build collaborations and enduring friendships. And perhaps this last point is key. There are a lot of friends and colleagues in this audience that I'm delighted to see again, and I hope that new friendships are formed out of this reunion this week, and they become enduring collaborations that actually help us get towards that goal of eliminating Buruli ulcer. Now, just a little bit more on the faces in this image. If you are eagle-eyed, the circles in pink are delegates that at IMUC-II who are now speaking again at IMUC-III, and you might be able to recognise them, and you'll certainly hear them speak over the course of the next 3 days. The delegates with the purple circles are here but are not formally presenting, so you're also encouraged to try and find them. Some of our colleagues in this image unfortunately have passed, but they're sorely missed, dearly loved. All right, IMUC-II. So we're here to make a new history and to contribute to what these people have, the foundations that they've laid. 2 housekeeping slides. If you would like an updated program, this is the QR code that takes you to our webpage where we have the very up-to-date program. As you can imagine, people are ill, they can't attend, speakers change, so the most up-to-date program should be there. Now, the housekeeping. Phone switch to silent. We are going to record this event and we will make the entire 3 days available online. I think if there is anything that you don't want recorded, perhaps let us know in advance, but that's our intention, is to make all of the material from this next 3 days publicly available. Toilets are located on the ground floor, and I think my team can, am I pointing in the right way? I think we are. Toilets up the, yep, up this way. We're providing morning tea, lunch and afternoon tea, so you shouldn't go hungry. If you have a question, we have our conference team have the green lanyards, so they're the people to hit up if you've got any questions. Anything else from my support team that we need to highlight before I move to the next stage? Well, without any further ado, I would like to welcome to the podium the Honourable Minister for Health in Victoria, Marianne Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm informed that your field trip this year is to the Mornington Peninsula, so at the next conference I'll be looking forward to the team shot, which I'm sure you've already worked on where that's going to occur, Tim, and so and you'll be able to talk about the experience that you had in the field, but also that more colleagues will come on board for the very next time that you come together. Can I join you also, Tim, in acknowledging that we are on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation? And I wish to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge all Indigenous peoples who are here in the room with us today, because we know that around the world Indigenous people face disparities when it comes to their health outcomes when they are compared with non-Indigenous peoples, and so it is here in Australia, where the health outcomes for our Aboriginal people are so much worse than those of our non-Aboriginal people, and this is simply not good enough. I want to say here in the state of Victoria, you may have read about our Commonwealth, our federal referendum that we had to give a voice to First Nations people. That was lost. But here in Victoria, we are a government that is committed to truth through the IMUC Justice Truth-Telling Commission, to voice through the First Peoples Assembly, now in its second term, and to treaty. And tomorrow I will be joining my ministerial colleagues and the Premier of our state at a very important ceremony where we mark the beginning of treaty negotiations here in Victoria. So to Professor Tim Stinear, Tim, wonderful to see you again. I've been hearing a lot about you and your persistence when it comes to the Buruli ulcer and the work that you have done over many, many years. And I was reflecting on some of the things that you say. As we get older, we can choose hubris or just a bit of humility and wisdom. And I know that there's plenty of that in the room and that people will be looking to share that over the coming days. To Professor Jane Gunn, I know you'll be speaking this morning as the Dean of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences here at the University of Melbourne. It's wonderful to see you again. From the Department of Health, Dr Clare Looker, who's our Chief Health Officer, and Dr Christian McGrath, our Deputy Chief Health Officer. Chief Health Officers have been kept very busy of recent years. I mean, we all know about COVID, of course, but right here in Victoria now, we have a range of challenges that we're facing, be that Japanese encephalitis, be it Mpox, a range of issues, and of course the daily grind of a Chief Health Officer, making sure that our water and food and other environmental sources are safe for all of us. To Dr Kingsley Asiedu, who's the Medical Officer, Department of Control of Neglected Tropical Diseases from the WHO. Where are you? Kingsley, I didn't meet you on the way in. There you are. Welcome. And of course, again, to you, Tim. For over 80 years, how people have contracted the neglected tropical skin disease, the Buruli ulcer, has remained a mystery. While the ulcer is rarely fatal, it can cause severe tissue destruction if not diagnosed and managed effectively. And while the Buruli ulcer has been described in more than 30 countries and is an ongoing public health issue in West and Central Africa, it has also been unexpectedly surging in temperate southeastern Australia, impacting the Bellarine and the Mornington peninsulas for decades and now encroaching on major metropolitan centres. This includes the inner suburbs of Melbourne and the city of Geelong, which are home, of course, to over 5 million Victorians. And indeed, Professor Gunn will talk a little bit later about her own experiences in Gippsland with the ulcer. Now, annually, the Department of Health is notified of approximately 250 cases of this disease. However, we are seeing a concerning trend with increasing numbers of human cases reported each year. 65 cases reported in 2013, compared with a total of 362 cases last year. This increase is obviously very concerning and shows the absolute importance of gaining greater understanding of this disease and transmission pathways. This can help us to minimise human cases and ensure appropriate public health interventions can be made to protect the health and well-being of Victorians. So I'm very honoured to be able to officially welcome delegates to the 3rd International Mycobacterium ulcerans Conference, otherwise known as IMUC. Look, I used to work in communications, and you've got to work on that, team. Okay. Despite the substantial research progress to address key questions around how the Buruli ulcer is transmitted, developing diagnostics and effective antibiotic treatments, there are still so many challenges remaining. The networks that you build, the information that you will learn by attending these key events enable us to address these challenges, improve the healthcare experience of our community and strengthen our commitment to best practice outcomes for all Victorians. So I've had a look at some of the topics that you'll all be discussing over the next 3 days, and I know that you will gain a lot from it. I was very impressed by the approach that was outlined to the way in which you the way in which you approach the opportunity of the next 3 days. I love that idea of challenging ideas, but doing that in a what was the word that was used? Gentle? In a gentle way. So I might take some of that back to Parliament with me. I'll give it a go. It's so important to attend conferences like this, where you're collaborating, you're exchanging ideas and furthering the understanding and knowledge of these neglected diseases. And I want to thank all of you, because the fact that you're here shows that this is a less neglected disease than perhaps it was a number of years ago. But you've got to maintain the momentum and maintain that kind of drive that you all have. And it must be hard at times. It must be hard when you're working perhaps isolated or alone or in other countries and you're out of sync with time and place. So being together in person, knowing that you all share this commitment, must be encouraging for you all and must give you that energy to keep on going. Can I just say, because I think if I don't say it, no one else will, it's really important that you have some fun over the next 3 days. And for those of you who have joined us from other nations, it's a really temperate time right now in our state. You are travelling to the Mornington Peninsula. Please do not be put off by the fact that it is the site of the Buruli ulcer. It is also one of our premium wine growing regions, and so I hope that you get to enjoy that as well. I do want to take a moment before I close to recognise the Beating Buruli team, 22 scientists and clinicians who were nominated for the Australian Museum Eureka Award this year for their work in understanding the dynamics and transmission of the Mycobacterium ulcerans in Victoria. So, to the Doherty Institute, Austin Health, Bio21 and the Pest and Environmental Adaptation Research Group at Melbourne Uni, to Curtin University, to Millersville University in the US, to the CSIRO, AgVic, Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, Barwon Health and the Victorian Department of Health. Thank you all for the contributions that you have already made and that you will continue to make over the next 3 days. I wish you all a very successful conference. Thank you for your invitation to join me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Minister. That was terrific. I will now invite, I believe it's Dr. Clare Looker, Chief Health Officer for the Department of Health in Victoria, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you all for coming today. I'd also like to, of course, acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people and to pay my respects to their elders past and present and to any First Nations friends or colleagues that are with us in the room. Thank you for all coming today together today to discuss what is a public health issue close to my heart as a Victorian. We know, of course, that Buruli ulcer is caused by Mycobacterium ulcerans, and it does pose some very unique challenges for the public health space. Once considered rare outside tropical regions, it's now established itself, as we've just heard, well in parts of Victoria, and it's raising essential questions about its environmental and public health implications. I know that we'll hear lots in coming days about how humans contract Buruli ulcer, and we know it's a question that's confounded many good minds in this room, but also our public health control efforts. This intrigue has existed since the discovery of Mycobacterium ulcerans in patients in the Bairnsdale region of Australia back in the 1930s. We know that Buruli ulcer epidemiology can be unpredictable. With a 4 to 5 month incubation period, outbreaks can occur in specific geographical areas and then disappear for many years. The combination of these factors has made it challenging to establish how Mycobacterium ulcerans is spread to humans, and this is despite all the global research that we will hear more about, but that we know has been underway for more than 80 years. While Buruli ulcer transmission does appear to vary across different parts of the world, the collaborative research efforts, which have already been referenced multiple times in Victoria, are making significant progress in understanding the disease. We know there are still some questions about the exact transmission cycle, and it's not fully understood, but evidence is increasingly suggesting that mosquitoes and possums can play a role in spreading the infection. I, of course, note the recent discoveries that have helped shed light on these processes by so many of the attendees here at this conference, and so many of them, with some bias, I will acknowledge, are Victorian. In addition to the ongoing research, raising community awareness and education has been a key public health strategy. Victoria's local public health networks have been working closely with local communities in high-risk areas to increase understanding of Buruli ulcer symptoms and the importance of early treatment. Looking ahead, a comprehensive surveillance program will enable prompt detection of new cases, especially in regions that we didn't previously consider to be at risk. When we combine this surveillance with enhanced community education, it can empower residents to recognise early symptoms and to seek early diagnosis and timely treatment. Addressing the challenges of Buruli ulcer in Victoria requires a multifaceted approach. With continued collaboration among researchers, healthcare providers, policymakers and a few of us in public health, we can strive to better understand, prevent and ultimately control the spread of Buruli ulcer in Victoria. I'd like to add my thanks to you all for your time and commitment to the huge amount of work that has already happened in this space, but the ongoing work on what is a critical public health issue. I'm looking forward to hearing lots more about the upcoming, the new research findings that will be presented over the next couple of days, as I know many of you are also. So thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Claire. I now invite our Dean, Professor Jane Gunn, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim. It's great to be here this morning and to see all of you gathered around a really important topic, and a 3-day conference with a bit of social networking sounds wonderful. And the 3rd International Mycobacterium ulcerans conference that has just been declared open by Minister Thomas this morning. So I want to also acknowledge our First Nations peoples of the lands that we are on, but also the lands that everyone here comes from, and to reflect on the long history and tradition that our First Nations people have with the lands that we stand on right here. I would like to acknowledge our special guests. It's wonderful to have the Minister for Health open the conference this morning. I think that really does speak volumes to the support of the Victorian government to this important area, and also wonderful to have Clare Looker here as the Chief Health Officer and Christian McGrath too. I think it's really great to see this support for the conference, and wonderful to have Dr Kingsley, Asiedu Medical Officer from WHO in Geneva. It's wonderful to have you here with us this morning as well. So I would like to add my congratulations for all of you making the long trip here, for those of you who have come from afar, and I hope you do enjoy this city. For those of you who it's the first visit, I hope you get a chance to really get a sense of Melbourne and all that it has to offer. We are very excited at the university to be the venue for this conference. It is what I think universities are about. They're about convening people around topics that are of great interest and providing an environment that really sparks that networking and sparks those ideas that don't necessarily happen in the day-to-day and with the busyness of work that I'm sure all of you in this room are subject to when you're not sitting at a conference like this. We've heard some information about the Buruli ulcer, and I grew up in Gippsland, as Minister Thomas alluded to, in a town called Sale, and it's not that far from Bairnsdale. And I was aware of this thing called the Bairnsdale ulcer from when I was a very young primary school student, and I was aware that we would go to school camps and excursions and things, and people would talk about this thing. There were two things that we were told not to, or to be careful of, and this sort of came through generations. And one thing was to be very careful when we went into the sort of brackish waters in the lakes, and there's a lot of lakes around Gippsland and Bairnsdale, lots and lots of lakes, because there was this sort of theory that tiny weeny cuts in your legs or whatever might end up with this terrible ulcer that we got told about. And the other thing was that there were mosquito bites that went bad. That was a warning. Beware the mosquito bite that goes bad. And so, I remember as a child having some pretty mosquito bites that went a bit bad and quite swollen and big and all the rest, and there would be quite a bit of alarm around it, but never did I end up with what we know is the infection of the Buruli ulcer of Mycobacterians, Buruli, to my knowledge, ulcerans. I don't know, maybe we should all volunteer for our samples to be taken. But the thing it said to me is that then I came to university here, great medical school, best medical school in the country, and I remember sort of pronouncing something about this thing and being told that it was, it was a bit of a load of rubbish. My ears picked up about Mycobacterium ulcerans, because when we did the Mycobacteria, it was still pretty interesting when I was a medical student because of TB, etc. And this other form was just sort of like not even sort of talked about. So I think a lot has happened since, thanks to all of you in this room. But it also, I think, harks back to something Tim said about, listening deeply to each other. I think when we have communities where things are found more commonly, there is quite a bit of knowledge, at least it may not be correct, but it's really foolish not to listen to what is being said by the people that are seeing this and hearing these stories in their families. And I think this is one of the other things we can take from our Indigenous colleagues around this importance of oral history. So I'm really pleased you've solved the puzzle because it's a really important problem. The other thing is, well done on the team last night for also being listed at the Victorian Health Awards. This is rising in interest and importance here. I just was reflecting on the fact that it wasn't that cool to study coronavirus, actually, but there were some groups around the world that kept going with coronavirus. And really, and of course, we know what happened with the outbreak of COVID-19, that SARS-CoV-2, there was a lot of interest in coronavirus. And I think these unusual infections, I don't need to tell the group in this room this, but where they're less common and where they lead to these very, very severe and very destructive and hard to contain infections through very simple engagement with the environment. It doesn't take much imagination to think about what if that became more common, what if that was less isolated in the less years in between events. So I just say to all of you, please keep up the great work. Please get to know and understand these infections as much as you can, because we know that this is going to be needed, if not for this exact version of illness, for one that's very like it but is much more infectious and much more destructive. So I'm glad you're gathering and that you're going to be taking your research even further. I want to acknowledge a key breakthrough in research that was published in the Nature Microbiology paper in January 23rd this year, because I think this paper provided the evidence through bacterial genomic analysis of possum poo and local mosquitoes that possums are the reservoirs for transmission to humans, and that mosquitoes are spreading the infection, and that this is now proven. And knowing the way that it spreads, we can now start to really double down on how to prevent it. So I know that when you're tracking down these sorts of mysteries, that it requires a huge team, and I acknowledge everyone that's played a part in that. I know that Professor Tim Stinear, sitting here in the front row, brought together a team of more than 22 scientists from across the Doherty, Austin Health, Bio21, Pest and Environmental Adaptation Research Group at Melbourne Uni, Curtin University, Millersville University in the US, the CSIRO, Agricultural Victoria, the Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, Barwon Health, the Victorian Department of Health, and more partners to really draw this collaborative research project together. So that Beating the Buruli initiative brought together an array of experts across human health, microbiology, entomology and marsupial biology, covering field and lab-based research, an absolute stellar example of One Health research. I was delighted to read that our students were even involved in helping collect possum poo, and that has played a very important part, of course, of unravelling the mystery. So we're really proud of the Doherty Institute here at the University of Melbourne, and a joint venture with Royal Melbourne Hospital. We feel that this really signifies some of the absolute deep strength and expertise that lies within this precinct in infection and immunity. It really is world class. We are very, very proud of the scientists that we have here. I'm delighted that the Beating the Buruli team have been shortlisted twice to 2 really important prizes. I said, just keep going. Eventually you're going to win. They're going to realise they've been getting it wrong and you really deserve it. So please keep going. Being a finalist is wonderful, but I know there's a moment when you will take the podium with the gold prize. I think that, you know, our seaside destinations, enjoying the outside environment is part of what we like to think about as living in Australia. It's really an important part of the Australian lifestyle. Mosquitoes are a very, very annoying pest for all of the people, all Australians, and I'm sure for everyone in this room, the countries you come from. Mosquitoes are really causing us more and more problems, and I know that this research that you're doing and the days of conference that you're going to have is going to bring us closer to really tackling what is a very destructive condition. And I know that from every patient that's experienced this, I'm GP myself, and I saw examples of this. I have had patients in my clinic that have had this ulcer. Some, fortunately, the 2 most recent cases were treated very, very quickly and did very, very well, although they did have quite a bit of surgery. Earlier in my years that they were not, so the outcomes were less favourable. So I know that the patients will thank you. I hope you have a wonderful meeting over the next few days. I wish I could stay and learn more about this, but I look forward to hearing the reports from that come out of the conference. So thank you for having me here this morning, and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you, Professor Gunn. Well, yeah, that draws to a conclusion the official opening of IMUC-III. Yes, Professor Gunn, we release you to your day job. Thank you very much. Thank you. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, and so we can thank our opening speakers for that gift. And what I thought we could do is, as we invite our opening chairs to get things going, we could just have a quick 2-minute leg stretch, stand up where you are, break. And we're going to take advantage of the extra time we've gained, perhaps to get to morning tea a little earlier. This is not an opportunity for speakers to blow out their time. We want to really respect everyone's time schedule here. So look, a 2-minute leg stretch, toilet break if you need, but we'll start very shortly, and I'll just get our chairs set up for this opening session. All right, well, let's begin the opening scientific session of IMUC-III, where I will hand over to the co-chairs of this session, Drs. Christian McGrath and Clare Looker, who will keep us all in order. We have 15 minutes up our... Oh, no, we've got less than that now. We're already eating into our time. Anyway, we have a very special opening speaker for IMUC-III, but I will hand over to my chairs to take control from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. It is my great pleasure to be chairing with Clare this session on, and I like the name, which is why I'm trying to look at my papers to make sure I get it right, but it's Where in the World is and was Buruli ulcer? And I've got to say, from a public health point of view, knowing where it was and why it's not there anymore would be really, really helpful. So if we can get to the bottom of that during this session, that would be great. So my name's Christian McGrath. My badge says I'm from government. I'm actually an infectious diseases physician, but I have the privilege of working as the Deputy Chief Officer in Victoria on communicable diseases with Clare and the department, and I've also worked with a lot of the people in this room, and I'm really proud of the work we've done as a state to contribute to the knowledge around this neglected tropical disease. But I think we all acknowledge the role that Professor Hayman has played in this space, and I don't think I could do it justice, except to say that while I wasn't a University of Melbourne student in medicine, your reputation precedes you, and I think it's well understood your contribution to this disease. I think you were the convener of IMUC-II in 1998, and I think I've got a really exciting bio that I get to read out that I think you probably wrote yourself or had someone write for you, but described yourself as an ancient pathologist who still retains an appointment of the newly formed Department of Clinical Pathology at the University of Melbourne, having graduated from medicine in 1957, and then training as a general pathologist in Sheffield in England and at the Alfred Hospital here, followed by 20 years working as a hospital pathologist in Gippsland. You had obtained an MD in 1993 by thesis on the subject of the Barnsdale ulcer, which I think gives you, a lot of right to open this session and tell us absolutely everything you know. And I also understand you've been unwell recently, so we really thank you for making the effort to come here today to speak to us all. So please, would everyone join me in welcoming Professor John Hayman.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I've only just escaped from the institution across the road, so my son is with me here now. Should I collapse on the way, he is ready to take over straight away. Thank you. Some of us here were privileged to be at an extraordinary meeting held at Yamoussoukro in 1998. Okay. At that... oops. Back one.
Yes. Sorry, everyone.
I'll let you turn on if you don't mind.
Yeah, I can progress.
At Yamoussoukro, the first talk was given by Wayne Mayers, who described himself as an octogenarian pathologist, that is, an 80-year-old pathologist. Today, I'm privileged to be speaking as a nonagenarian pathologist, that is, a 90-year-old pathologist. Yes. Since 1998, we've seen some extraordinary developments in our knowledge and understanding of Mycobacterium ulcerans. As well as that, there's been an increase, a 10-year increase in the life expectancy of pathologists. Next. My talk, I'll try and be as brief as possible, but I'd like to go back through my associations with some of the giants of the past, and then follow it briefly by some of our present very active contributors. And I apologise in advance to all of those who I don't mention, but hopefully we'll hear of their work during the next couple of days. Thanks. The first paper on Mycobacterium ulcerans, as we all know, appeared in 1948, and the first author was Professor Peter McCallum, who was Professor of Pathology at the University of Melbourne, and he saw acid-fast bacilli in smears from patients from the Bairnsdale district, and he recorded it in the notes, which we can see there. He wasn't sure what he was looking at, whether it was tuberculosis or leprosy. And then I became indentured as a trainee pathologist at the Alfred Hospital, and I lived very close to Glen Buckle. And I drove Glen to the Alfred Hospital every day for some 3 years. And this had great advantages. I had my personal microbiology tutor. I came to know all there was to know about Mycobacterium ulcerans back in those days. And as well as that, I had the use of Glen Buckle's car park at the Alfred Hospital. So it was quite advantageous. From the other person who I knew very well was Jean Tolhurst, who worked with Glen Buckle. She had previously been director, but she had serious illness and resigned, but continued to work and write in the department. And that's her book, The Chemotherapy with Antibiotics and Allied Drugs. And almost certainly it was Jean Tolhurst who first put forward the name of Mycobacterium ulcerans. That's my own copy of the book from Glen Buckle. The next person I want to talk about is Professor Janssens, who worked in the Belgian Congo way back in the 1940s. And he was most unfortunate in some regards. He saw his first cases in 1942, and he collected over 200 cases. The Bairnsdale, the Melbourne people, got 6 cases. He had 200. He knew about their cases because the article reached him in the darkest Africa, but he couldn't grow it. And where he was in the Belgian Congo, he couldn't get a refrigerator incubator to go low enough for the organism to grow at 30 degrees. So he missed out. He missed out on several fronts, but he did a remarkable amount of work, and he left the Belgian Congo and became director of the Tropical Medicine Institute in Antwerp, where I met up with him. Back in Uganda, the Uganda Buruli group formed under Professor Bradley, and they did some initial work looking at an outbreak that occurred just north of Kampala, the conference. And they established 3 features of the disease. They established that it related, there was no case-to-case transmission. The incubation period was 5 to 6 days. And they also established the fact that the BCG was of value in preventing the severity of the disease. So they made 3 important discoveries. At the same time, David Barker arrived in the Buruli district with his family, and he did some important epidemiological work along with various people from the district and his mate Carswell, who was a Scottish surgeon. You can see him in that picture. Of course, it is the surgeon who's wearing the tie. Yes. But that's the same David Barker, of Barker hypothesis fame. And I met with him both in South. But he had to leave Uganda in a hurry when Idi Amin came to power. But he settled down back in England and, of course, found these famous papers that led to the Barker hypothesis. I've been back to that district, and the name Buruli is gone. There's no longer a Buruli district, and the Buruli ulcer itself is virtually unknown. People know about it, but they just don't see it. So for some reason it was there, and now it's gone. All right. The other person I'd like to talk about is Wayne Mayers, who was really a gentle giant who did so much. He ran a 3,000-bed leprosy hospital in the Congo, and from there he had outreach clinics, and it's through these outreach clinics that he found these ulcers, and he himself collected several hundred cases. And then he retired from the Congo and went back to Washington, where he joined the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and he wrote a seminal fascicle on leprosy and on Mycobacterium ulcerans, which still holds today. Next. The other person of great repute is Frank Fenner. Frank Fenner was due to go off to Washington when Glenn Buckle grew the organism, so he picked up a vial of Mycobacterium ulcerans and took it with him to Washington on the plane. So he worked on it there, and his paper, probably the second paper on Mycobacterium ulcerans, came from that time. Next. The next person I'd like to is Professor Anthony Radford, who's still around but unfortunately could not make it today. And he studied the disease extensively in Australia, in Africa, and particularly in Papua New Guinea. And this is his picture from the Kamusi Valley, showing the dreadful scarring that occurred in that area when he was up there way back in the 1970s. Next, I'd like to mention my friend, one-time friend John Buntine and his wife Norma, and of course you can recognise the bloke down in the far corner. John did a tremendous amount of work on the surgery, early surgery, of excising the ulcer, and as well as that he worked in Africa, both in Ghana and in Benin. He had two unfortunate accidents when he was with WHO. The first one was when they were travelling by vehicle from Benin to Ghana through Togo, and the vehicle collapsed, and they were trapped in the vehicle for several hours. However, they survived that. A worse incident occurred when they were in Geneva, and we were meant to have dinner together, but about half an hour into the dinner, we noticed that John was missing, and Tim fortunately went off looking for him and had heard these plaintive cries coming from the toilet, and he'd locked himself in the toilet, but then he was rescued on that occasion. Okay, well, those are the giants of the past. I'd just like to mention a few of the people who are so prominent today, and of course that's Kingsley, and he, I think more than anyone else, has been responsible for bringing us all together and making us work as a team and fostering these international collaborations, as well as some exciting trips to various places. So Kingsley, thank you for that. And then, as well as that, we have Francois Portals, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but she's done so much, and we go back to the early 1990s when she came to visit me down in the Bairnsdale district. I should mention at this point that I trained at the Alfred Hospital. I spent 3 years training as a general pathologist, but then before I'd finished my training, there was a vacancy. They couldn't find a pathologist to go to Gippsland. So even though I hadn't qualified, I was sent down to Gippsland as a pathologist. Gippsland employed me as a full specialist, a consultant, and paid me. They gave me a house, they gave me a car, and they arranged me to go back to Melbourne 1 day a week just to have my work checked, as I wasn't yet qualified. My initial appointment was for 2 years. I stayed in Gippsland for 20 years. So there we are. So that's us back there. Moving on, Pam Small and her group at the Rocky Mountains did so much in developing the mycolactone and identifying that as so much as a characteristic. Next. And May Smith, who I'm pleased to say is here now. And May, at one stage there was May down in south east Australia, at Bairnsdale looking at the ulcers, and there was May Smith way up in Mosman, north of Cairns, looking, and we're the only ones who knew anything about or cared at all about the Bairnsdale ulcer in Australia. But looking, studied the cases around Mosman, where they were known as the Bairnsdale ulcer, and that's the next one, please. The next one shows where these cases were, and she did the epidemiology. She helped me with the histology and the dendritic cells, and together she did very much achieved a worthwhile MSc by thesis on the topic. We have Roy and his team at the Royal Children's Hospital. And you'll notice one very prominent person there in the foreground, and it was this team for the work of Paul Johnson who developed the PCR technique for identifying Mycobacterium ulcerans, and it was used as a rapid diagnostic test, and it was also used as a way of identifying the organism from the environment. One of the first times we used it was in a small outbreak north of Frankston, and there we found cases scattered in a very isolated area, but we could isolate that they were coming from a illegal sand mining area where the sand had been taken away and the water replaced by water. And that was the first time, I think, that we used it to show that where the organism was actually coming from. Paul Flood, I think, is outstanding, and Paul is here today too, I'm pleased to say. And one reason why I'm here today is because of the way Paul has been looking after me. But Paul, first, we had cases appearing on Phillip Island. Paul identified them, he treated them appropriately, and he sort of brought me in to sort of help with the histology of the lesions. And I can remember now going down there with my little dog and picking up the samples from his operating table. So, yes, but there was quite an outbreak on Phillip Island, and Paul identified them and treated them appropriately. They're mostly to an area just to the east of Cowes, an area known as Silver Leaves. And we were able to identify the source of this from contaminated water which was there on Phillip Island and used for irrigating the Cowes golf course. Yes, and we had our big IMUC-III meeting on Phillip Island, and you can recognise some of those faces there, I think, and that was a very successful meeting. You'll notice one, Frank Fenner was there, and well, I think we really got together on that occasion. Yes. Then we have Daniel O'Brien, who I think is the world champion of case collection, and he's worked on Mycobacterium ulcerans infection in Africa and also on the Bellarine Peninsula. I could never understand how the infection came to be rampant on the Bellarine Peninsula, but now knowing that Daniel was active in Africa, we know now how it got from Africa. Yes. But that's that. And then there's the group at Vidral, particularly Janet Fife and her group, and they've taken over the PCR technique and improved it, and it's now, well, it's been used thousands and thousands of times, and you'll hear all about that later on. Yes. Lastly, we've got our three heroes. They're sort of leading the charge today. May is still going. There was a time when there was only May up in North Queensland and there was me down in southeast Australia. But then along came Paul Flood, Paul Johnson and Tim Stinear, and we've not looked back. We've now got a real team really going. So that's our current leaders next. I'd just like to conclude by emphasising my own contributions. The first was the postulated epidemiology of Mycobacterium ulcerans infection, and my theory was, and this got me my MD, was that it was related to warm temperate rainforest, and that those black dots are where the infection occurred in East Gippsland, and the green shaded areas, area where there was relict warm temperate rainforest. It was a wonderful theory. Unfortunately, it was wrong. Of course, there's no rainforest on Phillip Island, there's no rainforest on the Bellarine Peninsula, and there's no rainforest on the Mornington Peninsula. So I think that one's out the door. My second hypothesis, that the Mycobacterium was derived from Jurassic time, and you'll notice I got a Lancet paper out of that. But that's wrong too, because we now know that Mycobacterium ulcerans evolved from Mycobacterium marinum some 50,000 years ago, not 150 million years ago, as they postulated. But lastly, I cling to my aerosol hypothesis, and this is I still like to think that in some cases the infection is spread by contaminated aerosol. This next slide is the 9th hole on the Cows Golf Course, and cases occurred in houses just beyond those trees, and that's where the spray is spraying on the 9th hole, and we know that that water was contaminated with Mycobacterium ulcerans. My mother collected all these old photographs, and this is an 88-year-old photograph, which I think explains why I still have this intrinsic attraction to the aerosol hypothesis. Thank you all for looking at these pictures.
My goodness, what a start. Just echoing, what an absolute privilege, very genuinely, I think, for all of us in the room to have you here with us, Professor Hayman, and to be following your very, very incredible lead in your work on Buruli ulcer. So, no, thank you. As Christian has revealed, he's an infectious disease physician also by training. I know that there's lots of deep clinical experience here in the audience, but I think my public health background and the beautiful epi that you described and the wonderful sort of early work is fantastic, and speaks to a passion for public health also. So thank you. We are also very privileged today to be joined by Professor Tjip Van der Werf from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. So Professor Van der Werf has obtained both his MD and PhD degrees in the Netherlands. He's worked as a tropical doctor in Asiedu Hospital in Ghana, where he prepared his PhD thesis in tuberculosis and Buruli ulcer. In 1992, he registered as a Dutch chest physician and has worked in ICU and other clinical centres. From 1998, his research activities shifted back to Buruli ulcer and tuberculosis, and in 2005, he was appointed a full professor. I think he's well known to many of you. He has led WHO-sponsored trial on oral antimicrobial treatment of Buruli ulcer, both in Benin but also in Ghana. And I'm thrilled to hear from him also today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yes, it's working. First of all, thank you for inviting me over, and it's like a family reunion more or less, because so many familiar faces I've already met and hugged people around the audience. My conflicts of interest are also my acknowledgements, more or less. This was my first encounter. I'll take you back more than 40 years ago. I'm still connected to the university, but I retired from clinical work 4 years ago. But this was the challenge that I met. I was a young doctor, and we went through training and all these things. In Ghana, back then, there was a big catastrophe going on. There was a political and there was a humanitarian and socio-economical crisis. Many highly educated people, and doctors and nurses included, had actually left the country because the salaries would not suffice to even survive. And the health system was also in a state of disarray, and just church-related hospitals could still function due to the fact that there were connections with outside sponsors, NGOs and churches. And so when I worked in Agogo Hospital, we still had the possibilities to reach a diagnosis and to treat people with surgery and basic medical supplies. And in my course in Amsterdam, I never heard of Buruli ulcer actually. So this was the first encounter with this disease. And as you can see, there was no digital imaging at the time. It was analog pictures. But undermined ulcers and lesions at critical sites, as we call it now, was a challenge. We were told you have to do surgery, that's the way to go. Drugs seem to work in vitro, but in clinical practice there seems to be no response to treatment. That was the challenge that we met. Looking at hospital records and calculating the data, the census data from Ghana, we could identify a more highly endemic area north of Agogo Hospital in the Afram Plains, where, for instance, also Ananikrum, a village that many of us now know as an important epicenter of Buruli ulcer transmission, is located. The usual age distribution for African patients was identified. In this case series, it was of course difficult in times that there was no PCR available to confirm the diagnosis. We were able to transport frozen specimens from surgical specimens of these patients, and only 3 of them were actually cultured and identified as Mycobacterium ulcerans in the reference laboratory for mycobacterial disease in the Netherlands. So at least this case series was in part, you could say, confirmed as Mycobacterium ulcerans disease, but the majority were not confirmed. John Hayman has already alluded to the meeting in Yamoussoukro, an outrageous event. John is here, Kingsley is here, John is here again. Of course, the giants of the past are also in the image. Yamoussoukro was the trigger for me to start working on Buruli ulcer again. I was actually occupied as an intensivist, and it was Françoise Portals who made a phone call and said, you should come and present an overview at the Yamoussoukro meeting, because you know something about Buruli ulcer, don't you? And that presentation was later published as a review paper. And I just want to draw your attention to, the mistakes that we made. I've already mentioned one, that there was no response to drug treatment for Buruli ulcer, because you could see, you treated the disease and nothing is happening as you are treating. That's of course a mistake in our understanding of treatment response. The other probably mistake is also epidemiology. Why should we consider Kiribati as an endemic island group? There were 2 case reports written by a very enthusiastic surgeon, and I went back to that paper, and now, from what I know about the disease, I don't think these 2 cases were Buruli ulcer, to be honest. Okay, I'm happy to discuss with you after my talk. But of course, we all make mistakes. We just make a survey of the literature and try to quickly screen which areas in the world are endemic for this disease. We correctly identified Victoria as positive, and there was at that time also reports from Queensland in Australia, and the other parts you recognize as still endemic foci of disease. That paper took us to also start to write grants and to start research. And this is one of the aspects that we also felt was important to address. Not only the disease itself, but also the context of the patient, their beliefs, their attitudes, their experienced stigma about the disease. All important aspects that we try to pay attention to. I'm not trying to pick on you, Paul, but to consider all of China endemic because of one single case report, and the 25 years after that particular case report, no new cases from China. What should we think about it? Okay, and then of course, all of Australia to consider positive, while maybe only a few areas are endemic. Okay, we can still discuss about it, but that's the second mistake in our thinking, in my own thinking, is that we tend to exaggerate epidemiology. Things are getting worse and it's very bad. Because we are studying this subject, we are sort of biased in our minds. And if you find acid fast bacilla in a lesion, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a Buruli ulcer, even if the clinical image resembles, Mycobacterium ulcerans infection. I think I made the same mistake by considering China endemic, but at least I made an attempt to, say the epicenter of the problem is really in the African region. So, this sort of data, they may be an underestimation because these are reported suspected cases, and one could argue, are we sure that if you don't report that there is nothing out there? That's the other, angle to look at epidemiology. But anyway, from this graph, there are cases from Japan, but not from Indonesia. No single case from Kiribati, my favorite. So it helps us to cool down and to realize where is the epidemic really going on. And as Dr. Luker has already alluded to, the epidemiology is volatile over time. Travel cases or travel-associated cases are picked up at a sentinel site where the diagnosis can be confirmed by PCR and other tools, are an important tool for our understanding of epidemiology to sort of counteract the effect of underreporting. This is just a brief summary of travel-associated cases reported in the literature. And as you can see, we don't consider the USA as an endemic area for Buruli ulcer, even if occasionally a case is reported from that area because of travel to an endemic focus where the disease was contracted. Travel-associated research is very helpful, has been very helpful also by the team of Paul to better understand incubation period. I think it's a wonderful experiment of nature if you really go down, sit down with the patient, say, when did you travel to the Mornington Peninsula, where probably you picked it up in the summer, and now it's maybe 4 months later, so probably you're somewhere in the middle. But there's also a wide range of incubation periods, which is, I think, an important message from this slide. My contribution in the field has been in therapy, I think. And we were able to correct our initial mistake that there was no response to antimicrobial therapy. We had the information of the preliminary trial with nodules where unconfirmed cases were still operated after variable periods of antimicrobial therapy. And that triggered sponsors to help us run this trial in Ghana, where we compared the initial schedule of streptomycin combined with rifampin with a schedule that halfway that course we switched streptomycin to clarithromycin. And the two groups were by block random assigned, and they were, of course, because of the random idea, similar. And what you can see, of course, is that there was no difference between the two groups in terms of efficacy of treatment and effectiveness. This is the time to healing, and okay, the healing was slow, and this is actually the correction of our initial wrong idea that antimicrobial treatment didn't work. After 8 weeks of this treatment, hardly anybody had their ulcer healed. But over time, and median time maybe 20 weeks or more, healing occurred without adding any other treatment than dressing changes and topical treatments without any systemic treatment in addition, and no surgery in terms of debridement. That was the standard of care before this trial occurred. So this was very helpful, and this is the other probably explanation why clinicians were watching the response to treatment said it doesn't work. Because when you stop the treatment, it seems as if things get worse, as if there is no proper response. You need to do surgery as well. But we now consider this as a paradoxical increase in inflammation when mycolactone is washed out of the tissues, immune restoration occurs, and then you get this exaggerated inflammatory response in a considerable proportion of patients. So in the next trial, I think we made an extra step in paying more respect to study participants, their expectations, their ideas, their rights as study participants. So we trained in good clinical practice, and it was a wonderful experience to also have these south-south interactions on the floor. We had language barriers with French and English, and we had to do the whole program in 2 languages, but it was a wonderful experience. And of course, the volatile epidemiology made that the accrual of patients in the studies was very slow and very much slower than we had first expected, probably because we didn't realize what was happening out there in the field of epidemiology, the volatile nature of the incidence of disease. Again, this is the fully oral treatment compared to the standard of care, which was formerly streptomycin plus rifampin. And as you can see, the 2 curves overlap, and there is no there is actually a non-inferiority, and now the standard of care is, of course, streptomycin and clarithromycin based on this large study. The streptomycin treated patients were responding, but at the cost of more toxicity, of course. And this is the other important lesson that we've learned over the last decades. That is, the role of surgery has been exaggerated, has been overestimated. If we, like the standard of care in Benin was still doing surgery if there was no fast response to antimicrobial treatment. And in that context, it was possible to do a randomized trial to randomize patients to the intervention arm that, with the monitoring board, looking at all the data and protecting the rights of study participants, had a delayed decision to do either or not surgery. In the experimental group, the delayed group, less surgical interventions were needed, and also the time to healing was actually similar or at least beneficial for the intervention group. So early operations were no longer considered necessary, and I think that contribution was also an important one. The volatile nature of epidemiology in Africa has already been alluded to. And of course, in that decade that we studied, most of the endemic countries had a reduction in incidence over time. The only exception, of course, is Victoria, Australia, where we see the large increase in cases over time over the last decade. I end my presentation by paying tribute to these wonderful guests that we have for this beautiful symposium. We've become friends over time, and this is a long time ago, 20 years I think. If you get back to the other part of the globe, feel welcome to come and have dinner, and I thank you for your attention.
Maybe a minute for questions. If anyone has any. I think you're off the hook, actually. Thank you. Thanks again, Tjip. I feel like Dr. Kingsley doesn't need an introduction, given he's already had several introductions in the previous talks, but I feel obliged to read out the biography anyway. So Dr. Kingsley is the medical officer at the World Health Organization in the Department of Control of Neglected Tropical Diseases. He's received his medical degree from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana, and after completing rotations in paediatrics, obstetrics, gynecology and surgery at the Komfo Anoki, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, I apologise, teaching hospital in Kumasi, he started his career in public health in 1993 in the remote rural district of Amanzi West, one of the country's most deprived areas. And we've heard a little bit about the civil unrest, I guess, in Ghana at that time, from the sounds of it. He joined WHO in 1998. His areas of interest have included Buruli ulcer, yaws, and other skin neglected tropical diseases, district health systems, the role of community health workers in service delivery, and operational research. So it almost sounds like Buruli is just a side hobby, but you've obviously done a hell of a lot in the area. So, Dr. Kingsley, please welcome to the stage.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I think this is my third time in Australia. My first time was 98 during IMUC-II. And I remember at that time I had just come to Geneva. I didn't recognize that the time changes. So when I got to the airport, the check-in counter was empty. And they said, I said, I'm going to Australia. I said, but the flight is gone. I said, oh. So at that time, well, of course, we had this old type of watch, so it didn't change with the time, and I missed the flight. Anyway, well, my talk is going to be very easy because John and Tjip have covered most of the grounds, so any mistakes you see here, please, as John said, just cross them. All right, so I'm here with Dr. Barogui, who will speak a bit after me, after the coffee, on Buruli ulcer, more detail in Africa. My interest now goes beyond Buruli, so I've been involved in also skinned NTDs, what we call skinned NTDs. These are some of them. Of course, we are here because of Buruli, but in Australia also, I also note that they have some leprosy reported here. They are not locally transmitted, but I'm sure they are from those foreign-born nationals. Cutaneous leishmaniasis, I understand, occasionally due to travel, so this is expected. Scabies definitely, it's everywhere, and I'm sure here too. I put yours there. I don't know whether this is my new slide or old slide. But anyway, for yours, I have yesterday asked because there was an article many years ago, and because yours is for eradication, Australia will still need to prove that they don't have cases. So I've alerted them recently. Anyway, these are also some WHO documents you may be familiar with. The source of data that Tjip was mentioning, this is the source. And some of the cases that we have seen for between 2002 to 2023. Again, some of the cases, as Tjip mentioned, were reported either in travelers or what I call sporadic, reporting sometimes people, those times we were not very vigilant. So some countries like South Sudan, other places reported cases that are still in our database, but they are very old. The countries that regularly report are shown here, and you will also see that in the Western Pacific, Australia reports the most cases, as we know. Papua New Guinea used to report cases, but for some years now, they have not been. But the disease is still there, it's just that they are not reporting. Côte d'Ivoire in Africa remains the most endemic, and it's also the reason why the 1998 conference that Dr. John Hayman mentioned was held in Côte d'Ivoire. In the Americas, it was only French Guyana, but again, for the last few years, we have not been getting cases from there. Now, in terms of the numbers, definitely we have seen a decline in the globally, and then year by year, you also see increase, decrease, but you can't read into this because in many places in Africa, when they have resources to do activities, they pick up cases. When they have no resources, cases disappear, in quotes. Again, this is a trend you see in Africa. And then when you look into Côte d'Ivoire, which I said was the most endemic, again, the cases have consistently gone down. Definitely, I mean, we cannot rule out underreporting, but the trend appears to be like this. And in some of the hotspot communities, we have also noticed very obvious decline in number of cases. And then when you look at Benin, Benin is a small country, very good surveillance system. Again, the number of cases are down. Of course, we have already heard about Australia, and as of yesterday, when I look at their data, they are in Victoria, 322 cases. Last year was 362. So I believe that they will have more cases than last year. The number you see here also for 2023 includes some cases reported from Queensland. But again, when I look at their site, they had only 6 cases so far this year. This is French Guiana. This is the main focus in the Americas. Again, for the last few years, they have not been reporting cases. Now, I look at this article and I still, just a question to everyone. Where will Buruli be? What kind of technology we can use today to predict where Buruli can be? Tjip showed up to China. Yes, there were, I think, 2000, in the year 2000, there was a case reported from a traveler or someone who went to China. Ever since, no cases. Kiribati, I have seen the article, and then a few other places. But again, when you look between Australia and Japan, you also wonder what will happen in between these two countries. I mean, is it by coincidence or accident that there are cases in Australia, Papua New Guinea, and then it jumps all the way to Japan? What kind of environmental and also climatic issues can we look at? Then when you look at West Africa, of course, there are areas neighboring with the same geography, the same environment, the same, I think, people and behavior. Why is the disease there? And then also in the Americas, there are a few cases reported from Mexico. Peru used to report when Francois was actively following up with them. There were cases, obvious cases, but so far no more reporting. There was also a case, some few cases or case reports from Brazil. I don't know whether they were Buruli or not. But French Guiana definitely remains, and I think that they were also getting some cases that had come from Brazil to French Guiana. Whether they acquired from one country and went to another is still unclear. But I think my challenge here is where can Buruli ulcer be? When we look at Africa, is it only restricted to these countries? And then when we look at Australia, as I mentioned, Australia, Papua New Guinea, up to Japan, and what happens with other countries there, I think the environment not too different. And then in the Americas, some areas that we can look at. So, I mean, we still need to learn more about where the disease may be, where it may not be, but I just want to challenge those who have knowledge in geography, environment, and modeling and other expertise to see whether, looking at what is happening in one environment, we can also anticipate and predict. I know Buruli is very focalized disease, which is very true, but it is so focalized that it stays here and doesn't move. We have seen some movements in Australia, so what about other countries in Africa and the rest of the world? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think intense morning already, and I think we have earned a morning tea break.
Before we do that, though, to thank our speakers and our chairs for this opening session.
Yes, I'd now like to introduce Dr. Barogui. Dr. Barogui graduated in medicine in 2004. He has then worked as a clinician in a regional hospital in Savalou in Benin and at the Centre of Detection and Treatment of Buruli ulcer in Alada in Benin also. In 2012, he started his PhD in Buruli ulcer at the University of Groningen and in the Netherlands, and has worked as a medical officer at the WHO on neglected tropical disease. So thank you very much, and yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
thank you for giving me the floor to present the situation in Africa. As you know, Dr. Kingsley have already presented all these strategic documents, and the BUH is target now for control. On this graph, you can clearly see that the blue one is for Africa, and the second is the global situation. So this the trend during the last 20 years. You can clearly see that cases are decreasing. Of course, in 2020, we have the impact of COVID here. Regarding the case confirmation, some progress have been made in Africa. From 2019, around only 10% of cases was confirmed, but now we are moving to 30% in Africa. We have this progress due to Africa Buruli lab network. I think Dr. Sarah is there. We are going to present what we are doing on laboratory in Africa. Regarding the treatment, completion treatment rates in Africa in 2019, it is around 70%, but now we make a progress 10%, now we are around 80%. Regarding the category 3, the late detection, we don't make a lot of progress. We can see that in 2023, more than 37% of cases are category 3. And the problem is that there is a decline in expertise in Africa, and the system surveillance is still weak. This map have been already presented by Dr. Kingsley, this is the global situation. But now when we focus in Africa, we can see that most of the cases are from Africa, more than 80% of the cases are from Africa. When we look at to this map, we can see that cases are from West Africa and in Central Africa. Last year, most of the cases have been reported from Nigeria and the less cases from Togo. Again, some progress have been made. There is a decrease of more than 70% between 2024 and now. Again, we have a great impact of COVID here. Another progress we are making in Africa region is that we are promoting integration. And we have developed a lot of strategic documents to promote integration. You can see that we have a framework for skin NTDs, and we have developed a lot of courses, online courses, freely accessible for all. Again, the progress we are making on lab, it is due to laboratory network in Africa. This lab, we have 13 laboratories in 9 countries. This is the map of where the laboratory are from. Now we are moving, since we are promoting integration, the lab are not only focused on BU. From now, we are focused on all skin entities, mainly leprosy, yaws, and BU, and over mycetoma. So, this morning, I think Professor Tjip have presented some clinical trials that can be conducted in Africa. So we have shifted from injection to full oral treatment. All these have been made, most of these clinical trials have been made in Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Benin. Currently, we have some study in progress in Benin to reduce the duration of the treatment to move from 8 weeks to 4 weeks. The success factor, as we see this morning, we have a Yamoussoukro declaration. At this time, I was not in the system yet. I still student. But a few years ago, in 2009, we have Cotonou declaration. I was there. And we have 2 presidents from Africa who support this declaration. All these two declarations contribute to the political commitment and to the fight against not leprosy, against BU in Africa and in the world. Other success factors are now, as we told, we have enough, WHO have developed a lot of guidelines, and we have a reporting tool for all countries to report cases. We have laboratory capacity, and also drugs are free of charge for all patients is a success factor. Of course, we have community-based surveillance in most of the countries in Africa. Despite all this success, we have some challenges, as you know. So far, we don't know clearly the mode of transmission in Africa. The health system is still weak. We don't have a point of care diagnosis. The duration of treatment is too long, 8 weeks. It is a big challenge in some countries. Of course, we need to focus on drug resistance. And if we want to progress, we need some funds. So far, we don't have enough support, financial support in this country. What will be the next step for us? First of all, we need to continue to promote integration surveillance in our country. As you know, when cases are decreasing, we need to promote integration to be sure that surveillance are in progress. We still need a new drug to reduce the duration of treatment. In some countries, the system is very weak, and we need country ownership to support BU surveillance in the countries. We have to monitor drug resistance, it's very important for us, and we need a rapid diagnostic test. To do all this, of course, we need some resources. To conclude, as you know, Africa is Australia a little bit different, but we are share the same disease. While in Africa, the cases are decreasing, in Australia, cases are increasing. I hope that during the 3 days we are here, we can share some experiences and learn from each other. Thank you for your kind attention.
Maybe time for a couple of questions, if there's any from the audience. Yes. Oh, Eugene.
I don't know if there's a mic. Thanks for your presentation. Regarding the laboratory infrastructure, is it AFB stains, or are you doing PCR in the diagnostic cases? Or PCR?
Yes, so far we are doing PCR, and I think that tomorrow Dr. Sarah will present what we are doing. And now it is not only focus on BU, I sent you to some skin NTD, yours, leprosy, and Sarah and Serge will present some ongoing progress. Thank you.
Is the diagnostics paid for by the patient, or is it free by government, PCR, or who pays?
No, so far it is free for the patient, but there are someone who pay for them. But the patient is not direct paid by the patient. We have a support from some partners such as Foloro and Eswald, who supports the lab.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to hear a bit of an update on the epidemiology in Japan now from Associate Professor Rie Yotsu. Rie Yotsu is a global health dermatologist with experience in skin infections. She especially has a long-standing track record for a contribution to the field of skin-neglected tropical diseases, including Buruli ulcers. Her research focus has been on the epidemiology, surveillance and management of this group of diseases in both Japan and West Africa. She received a medical degree from the Jakai School of Medicine in Japan, as well as Master and PhD in International Health from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine and the University of Tokyo, respectively. And she's currently an Associate Professor at the Tulane School of Tropical Medicine in the US. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you for that introduction. So, in the abstract, when I submitted, I put the epidemiological update until 2022. Maybe I was a little bit modest that time, but now I put together until the end of October of this year, so the most recent data you'll see today. Okay. So yes, so I'll be presenting an epidemiological status of Japan, and this presentation is on behalf of the team working for Buruli ulcer in Japan. And in the audience today, we have Dr. Suzuki, Dr. Hoshino, and also Dr. Yoshida, who's come here also to join this meeting. So yes, so we are a small team, but very dedicated on working on Buruli ulcers. Japan is one of the another country, except for Australia, that's been reporting the cases of Buruli ulcers in the non-tropical region. And all the cases that has been confirmed by PCR, we have the subspecies of M. ulcerans called Shinshu-ense. This is the first case came from a prefecture called Shinshu Prefecture in 1982. Well, actually, the case was 1980. It happened in 1980, and the species was identified in 1982, and so the name is derived from that region. We have been trying to publish our epidemiological status along the years, and recently in 2024 we had one paper published. So this paper was until 2022, but yes, but by Dr. Fukaura, who unfortunately was not able to join us today. Current total number of cases in Japan totals to 89 cases as of end of October. After 1980, when the first case was identified, actually there has been the blank years, but it's just due to probably lack of awareness, so no cases has been identified during that years. But since 2004, one case was identified, then onwards, every year, we are having a continuous number of cases. And annual median has been 3, ranging from 1 to 10 cases, and average has been 4.1 new cases. In 2024, we have had 1 new case, which is still on treatment. So I think people are wondering, so where are these cases are coming from? And this is the map of these cases. And it's unlike here in Australia. In Japan, we have more kind of this wider distribution of cases. It's not like one hotspot. And yes, but there are cases, the most cases are reported from Okayama and the Shiga prefectures, where there are more physicians that are aware of the disease, and so therefore more cases are being diagnosed. It is interesting that Okinawa, which is the southernmost area of Japan, with a tropical climate, there's no cases there. So yes, so it's more the temperate region that we are having the case. The referral system, how it works is on the right-hand side of the slide. It's showing that the patient can visit first the clinic or to the tertiary hospital, and then if suspected, the samples are sent to the Leprosy Research Center situated in Tokyo, which they manage not just leprosy, but also the non-mycobacterial diseases, including Buruli ulcers. However, currently with more cases, some of the institutions are being able to diagnose themselves. So that's what I'm showing as other facilities. This is showing the characteristics of Buruli ulcer cases in Japan. The median age is very different from what we see in West Africa, of course, because Japan is well known for longevity. And so the average age is 56 years. And we are seeing more cases in females. We don't know why, but we see more cases in females. All cases, okay, well, except for one case, which has a living history in Taiwan, none of our case has travel history, meaning that it is really a domestic acquired case. We look into whether or not there has been potential contact with the water sources, and we see around 24% of the cases are like residing in close to rice field, this artificial lake, etc. Seasonality, most patients develop symptoms during the autumn and the winter months, but thinking about the incubation period, the patient may have acquired the infection during the summertime, but these environmental things, it's more better to ask Dr. Suzuki or Dr. Hoshino with this more information. They've been working on this. In Japan, the Buruli ulcer category, most of the cases, when they first present at the hospital, it is category 1. 77% of the patients are category 1, meaning that they go to the hospital at an early stage. However, if you see the treatment outcomes, cured with antibiotics alone, it's only 17% of the patients are cured only with the antibiotics. And many of them undergo surgeries and, yes, develop deformities and disabilities in the end. This is because patient goes to the hospital at an early stage. So there's early detection. But because there are so few cases, there are less limited physician that knows about the disease, leading to delayed diagnosis and treatment. So this is showing that. And so there's also a discussion whether or not we should be reporting the Buruli ulcer category at the time of detection or at the time of diagnosis and getting the treatment, because actually when they start the treatment, this category has actually advanced. So yes, so this is actually a question to maybe Kingsley or also others that working in epidemiology, that what is the best kind of the surveillance that we should be having. For all cases, like I mentioned earlier, that if the PCR has been done or if we have the data, the PCR has been positive for Shinshū-Ensei. So I'm going to present two cases of the recent cases that we've had. This is the case that we had in 2022 that it started from this papule which developed into ulcerations. In the patient's mother said that it was first like an insect bite, and then just when she first visited the tertiary hospital was the middle photo and the sort of treatment, which advanced to like that. Because, again, the patient was not able to get diagnosis at the early stage. And so I put the title as the mycolactin-specific lateral flow assay. Okay, I will go to discuss this on the next slide, but I first have another photo about this patient. This patient is a patient from Toyama Prefecture, where there's many rice field, and the patient's house is in front of the patient's house is this rice field and the pond. So this has been this patient was one of the patients that we registered for one of the studies that we've done with the funding from the GHIT, with the Swiss TPH, with Gunn and others. And the product was this rapid diagnostic kit to detect the mycobacterium produced by DDTD, a company located in San Diego, USA. And so at this stage, we applied this kit to this patient, and only the area number 4 tested for positive, meaning that there's mycobacterium in that area, where also we seen the progression of the disease. While 1 to 3, this test was a negative. But if you see the PCR, it was positive, meaning that really the PCR is, of course, taking the DNA, and so we cannot assess whether or not this is an active infection or it's also already ceased. But so detection of mycobacterium is very much a good biomarker for active infection and to assess cure. So yes, so this kit, well, yes, if it worked very well, we would have been very happy, but unfortunately, this research has terminated because of the difficulties in addressing the amount of mycobacterium and also not having the gold standard for which to compare this test against, because the PCR is also not the most effective method. So unfortunately, this project has been terminated, but here the message is that the mycobacterium is really effective if we can detect it in an effective way, even to assess cure. And this patient, even in the setting of like Japan, it took 270 days to treat this patient. And even she's left with these deformities. So we share the same challenges for Buruli ulcer, whether or not it is in West Africa, Australia, or in Japan. This is another case that has been reported in 2023, that this was in a 76-year-old female who was undergoing treatment for ulcerative colitis. So she was in an immunosuppressed state, and she developed this Buruli ulcer. And what was interesting about this case was that she had these 3 other satellite lesions where all the lesions tested positive for PCR, meaning that, yes, so there was some infection involvement. And all these 2 cases have been published. So, take-home messages here. I don't really like busy slides. Sorry, this is busy, but I needed to make it into 8 slides. So the take-home messages are the cases of Buruli ulcer continue to be diagnosed in Japan, totaling now to 89 cases. As awareness of Buruli ulcer increases, cases are reported from different parts of the country. Surveillance has become now very challenging, because there are now more cases and now more awareness. Some hospitals are gaining, which is good, gaining the capacity to diagnose cases independently using methods such as PCR, and now we have Desmodit of Moose and others. So it's been some of the PCR results we were unable to retrieve because of this. Now the reporting system has been becoming very difficult. And it's not always that the case consultation comes to the Hansen's Disease Center in Tokyo. Research studies are being conducted in epidemiology, transmission, and case management. This is a little bit going beyond Japan, but it's one of the studies we just currently got funding from the AMED, which is funding by the Japanese government, looking into developing a new wound treatment for Buruli ulcers called negative wound pressure therapy, which in countries like Japan or United States is more now becoming common for non-infectious diseases. But it's very costly and it needs this electricity. So the idea is that how we can develop with less cost and without any electricity. Also, we are open to provide support for case identification and confirmation to other countries, especially in Asia. There has been some talk about this, the Chinese case. This was a report made in 2000, which was a patient from China went to Netherlands and with the support with Antwerp was a case diagnosed as Buruli ulcer, but with the species, subspecies Shinshuense. So we think this our species in Japan is not just confined in Japan, but it can be also elsewhere in Asian countries. We don't know. But the photo in bottom is showing that last year, so I got this email that one study cited my publication. So I usually don't open all these emails, but somehow I got interested and opened this one, and it was a case report from India reporting on a case of Buruli ulcer, and I thought how interesting. And just by coincidence, 2 weeks later, so when I looked at the team, it was a dermatologist from Kolkata, India, where just by coincidence, I was going there 2 weeks later with the WHO leprosy meeting. So I thought of, okay, contacting them. So I was did some search. And before going on to my plane 5 hours before, I was able to meet them. And so the story was that there was only clinical diagnosis. They did not do a PCR. So that's also, first they tried to publish for the international journal, but which was rejected because they did not have the PCR results. So I suggested that they can ship the samples to Japan, and they did, and it was tested in the leprosy center. Unfortunately, the PCR was negative. But this has been 2 years after the sample was taken, and so, but the histopathology, maybe I think it can be Buruli ulcer, so I have all the slide decks from her, so I'll be happy if everybody can see this and let me know what they think. But yes, so there can be some cases hiding in other countries. And I think all the reference center will be happy to support them. And also we continue to educate dermatologists and other physicians in Buruli ulcer in an integrated manner with other skin infections in Japan. And yes, so I did not bring any skin NTD talk today, but that was actually my talk I do recently. And this has been, I think, one of a good practice in Japan, how training can be done together with other skin infections. And this is a skin infection summer school that we've been doing since 2015, inviting 120 young dermatologists within their 1 to 5 years of training to learn about Buruli ulcers, leprosy, but also other fungal infections, viral infections, etc. So, and the last epidemiological report was written by Dr. Ryo Fukawura. So we also try to recruit young dermatologists and physicians to be involved in the work of Buruli ulcer. Not always easy, but yes, maybe once in 2-3 years, or even more maybe, but we do have some interest, and that's what we are doing. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yotsu. I think fantastic to hear about the support you're obviously giving regionally, and I think also then the offer to share slides today, I think it really speaks to the collaboration right across the group. So thank you very much. Next, I've got the absolute pleasure of introducing a local speaker who has a background dear to my heart in public health medicine. So Dr Bhavi Ravindran works currently at the Peter Doherty Institute for Infection and Immunity, but he's also a Masters of Applied Epidemiology scholar, and he's a public health registrar, so training in public health medicine at the Victorian Infectious Disease Reference Laboratory. He's also worked at one of our local public health units, so flying the flag on lots of fronts, thank you. He's also completed his training with honours in medicine and a Master of Public Health, and looking very much forward to hearing your perspective on things today. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here as well. Great, so I'm going to be talking about the analysis of Mycobacterium ulcerans laboratory testing in Victoria from 2017 to 2022. So in terms of a brief background, I think I'm probably going to skip a little bit of this given the audience that we've got here, and I suspect a lot of you probably know a little bit more about the transmission of ulcerans than I do, but I think probably just to highlight down the bottom here that we've got the recent work that was done earlier this year and published sort of really highlighting the possums as a reservoir and then the mosquitoes as a transmission and sort of playing this chain into Buruli ulcer as well. Unfortunately, it's slightly a little bit of outdated slides, but I think one of the things I just wanted to touch on as well, we've sort of heard a lot about the epidemiology of Buruli ulcer in Australia, and I think I just wanted to highlight a few key areas of interest as well as part of this. So the blue dots that we've got on the map of Australia at the moment show the 4 endemic regions of Buruli ulcer. So we've got the first 2 in North Queensland, which is the Daintree rainforest and the Capricorn region, it's a tropical region in Queensland, and as we'd previously heard, they've had continuous but sustained low number of cases, probably around 5 to 6 per year, and sort of 6 cases year to date as well. Within Victoria, down the bottom, we've got the Bairnsdale and Gippsland region, where sort of the Bairnsdale also came from as well. But then we've also got the Greater Melbourne and Geelong region. And I think it's important to note, as sort of some of the other speakers have mentioned, that we've got an increasing number of cases within Australia. But I think being a bit more specific than that, it's not within Australia, it's sort of within the Greater Melbourne and Geelong area where there's been a substantial number of cases as well. One of the other things, there's also been 2 other areas where Buruli ulcer has been detected in Australia. So the first one is sort of up here in the Northern Territory, where late last year in 2023, there was a case review published around the last 30 years, which showed around 8 cases of Buruli ulcer. Again, quite sporadic, but again, it's sort of within that tropical climate. The other, a bit more of a concern as well in 2023, where there are 3 reported local cases in the New South Wales area of Batemans Bay. So Batemans Bay is just around there on the coast as well. What made these cases interesting was these 3 cases reported no local transmission, no travel to any BU endemic regions and sort of quite contained within that area. Batemans Bay also is quite a contained town in terms of you've got a freeway on one side and then you've got a water body as well. So certainly evidence of quite local transmission. Fortunately, there haven't been any more reported cases, so it's just been the 3 cases as far as I'm aware in 2023. However, work is still ongoing to determine that. I think just sort of really highlighting the Victorian trend at the moment and sort of really trying to dig a little bit deeper into what's driving this as well. So as we can see, we've had these are a number of cases that have been notified to the Department of Health, and there's been that continuous rise in cases sort of from around the 2011 period as well, but with a dip in 2020 and 2021 where people were movement restrictions, pandemic travel, people weren't necessarily going to some of the endemic areas. As you may be aware, within Victoria and Melbourne, we've got the Mornington Peninsula and Bellarine Peninsula as sort of these well-established areas that have had continuous Buruli ulcer transmission. But what we're seeing at the moment, particularly since 2017 with the Geelong and Surf Coast area, but then also more recently in 2019, is this inner Melbourne area emerge with sustained local transmission of cases where people haven't necessarily travelled to established endemic areas as well. these areas are a concern because they're new areas, so clinicians, patients aren't necessarily familiar with Buruli ulcer, and so that's being seen in terms of more severe disease within these new endemic areas compared to established, a longer presentation and diagnosis delays, and then also, more severe Buruli ulcer presentation, so more of those category 2 and 3 versus the category 1 that we see. The other striking thing within Victoria is the seasonal pattern that's sort of been well described between the symptom onset, presentation and notifications. We can see the onset of symptoms are quite low in sort of the summer period in January, December, but quite high in the winter period. And that really aligns with the 4 to 5 month incubation period that we're seeing with Buruli ulcer. Often takes about another month for patients to sort of notice this lesion, go to a general practitioner, and then probably another month or so then for those clinicians to then organise testing and then notify the Department of Health. And again, this pattern has been quite striking and still continues within Victoria over the last little period. Moving on to sort of the objectives of this tour, was we had the opportunity to look at the laboratory testing data that Vidril does. So Vidril is the principal diagnostic laboratory for M. ulcerans within Victoria and processes the majority of M. ulcerans testing cases. So the objective of this piece was to descriptively analyse the laboratory testing of M. ulcerans, identify patterns and trends, and determine the impacts of Chief Health Officer alerts. In terms of the method, so the study population included everyone who had or underwent a test for M. ulcerans conducted by Vidril between the 1st of January 2017 and the 31st of December 22. Descriptive analysis was performed on de-identified samples, which included test results, age, sex, date of sample collection, type of specimens. We had the Victorian Chief Health Officer alerts, which were also used during this time to look at the effects of public health messaging and testing. During the study period, there were 2 alerts issued on the 23rd of February 21 and the 9th of November 22. These alerts made by the Chief Health Officer often encourage patients or the public to be aware about Buruli ulcer, ways to prevent it, but then also looking at testing as well. In terms of the results, so there were 13,000 tests performed on 10,390 patients. The median age was 56 and 51% were male. 75% of the specimens were collected on the lower limbs, and the peak testing occurred in 2018 with the fewest tests performed in 2020. Of the 10,000 patients tested, 9,000 were only tested once. However, about 1,000 patients had more than one test performed. In terms of that's just the characteristics of the Vidril samples there. I think this is probably the graph that certainly demonstrates this seasonal effect and what we're seeing as well. So using the first sample of the 10,390 patients tested and for each year analysed, test positivity showed a seasonal pattern. So as we can see here, this is test positivity highlighted by the line here, and then the bar charts or the histogram shows the number of patients tested. And so we can see this clear seasonal pattern, particularly around the winter months and sort of the middle of the year as well, that remains quite consistent throughout the whole period. And we can also see this dip, particularly around the summer period as well. In contrast, the test numbers didn't really show that seasonal pattern that we can observe. What we did notice was in 2021 and 2022, we've had Chief Health Officer alerts that then corresponded with significant rises in testing as well. The other interesting point on this in terms of impact or changes to testing was in 2018 here, where we've got this significant jump in the number of tests requested. And we hypothesised that there was, at the time, there was an MJA call for a scientific response to Buruli ulcer, which generated a significant amount of media interest during that time and then led to a number of patients getting tested. In terms of the discussion, we observed that a substantial number of testing is requested outside of the established seasonal patterns where the likelihood of positivity is low. The September peak observed is consistent with exposure to M. ulcerans in the summer period, and given the average incubation time, delays to presentations. This is in keeping with some of the previous studies. We note the correlation between the Victorian show alerts and changes to the testing patterns and the hypothesis increased testing in 2018 with the MJA article. Within Victoria and Australia, whenever BU is mentioned, it's often described as a flesh-eating bacteria by news organisations, which is a cause for the public and then subsequent action as well. However, we note while these 3 events related to an increase in testing, as they're sort of outside the peak acquisition period, the summer and the peak diagnosis, they resulted in some low testing there. These findings indicate an opportunity to strengthen BU control because clearly the public respond to some of the messages around BU and the need for testing as well. However, we can sort of tailor those messages a bit. For example, messaging within the warmer months in summer, looking at prevention activities, and in the sort of winter peak where we know, given the incubation periods, looking at clinicians as well for testing. Noting the long incubation periods of Buruli ulcer though, we need to have carefully worded messages to ensure that people don't just go getting tested outside of some of those times. And then again, talking to clinicians as well to sort of promote that use of judicial testing as well and to provide patient reassurance during those times. Thank you.
Any questions for Bhavi? I'm very interested. Steve.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the great presentation. I'm Steve Nui, an ID physician from across the road. And yeah, I think it's really interesting work. I saw a patient yesterday with Barogui and Kingsley in our clinic who had actually presented over 11 months after he first noticed a lesion. So quite interesting. And as we saw from one of those earlier presentations, is that sometimes that incubation period and the actual clinical disease presentation can be remarkably slow and the diagnosis can be very challenging to make. So I'm just wondering about that last line about clinician judgment. Is there any advice that I guess could be provided to kind of help ensure that clinicians do test in the right circumstances? And how do you word it so that you don't discourage GPs from testing appropriate samples?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges within Victoria, and particularly with Buruli ulcer, is that expansion into the new endemic areas, particularly when patients and GPs aren't necessarily aware of what Buruli ulcer looks like, what the presentation should be as well. So I think it's going to be certainly carefully worded towards that. We have seen some evidence, particularly that we probably need to do a bit more, particularly with the new areas that sort of have slightly longer presentation and diagnosis delays compared to some of the established areas like the Mornington and Bellarine Peninsula as well. So I think it's certainly going to be a message, and I think it's going to be important to just align all of our public health messaging, particularly with the clinicians as well, to ensure that we're sort of getting the best bang for our buck, but also appreciating the long diagnosis periods. I guess the limitation of using laboratory testing data is that we didn't necessarily get clinical information as well. So all we've really got is patient age, sex, and then potentially some specimen notes as well, which again are quite variable as well. And there was quite a bit of missing information or sort of information that was quite difficult to decode. So I think sort of further work, sort of really interrogating comorbidities, for example, looking at the starter would certainly help there.
Can I expand on that? We were wondering in TB, you start thinking about TB if you cough more than 2 weeks, what would be the equivalent of a skin lesion that doesn't go away? And I asked, is 1 week? And you said 10 days, but that would make it more tangible, I think, for clinicians, healthcare workers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think coming from the public health background, not necessarily from a clinical dermatology point of view, I think certainly that's a conversation to have with like our clinical colleagues as well to make sure we've got that messaging there.
Hi, Caroline de Mangel, Institut Pasteur Paris. Thanks for the great talk. Sorry if I missed it, but can you explain what you mean by prevention activities? Is it using insect repellents or?
Yeah, so with the prevention activity, so a lot of the work with the Beating Buruli project, and certainly with the information that we've got in terms of the role of mosquitoes, those prevention activities which have sort of been highlighted in some of the other previous messaging sort of looks at sort of mosquito repellent, wearing long sleeve like clothing, for example, particularly in those warmer months and particularly in those established areas as well. We do know that as we've got quite a lot of visitors from like the inner Melbourne area, the Melbourne or surrounding areas going into these endemic areas, providing that messaging to prevent Buruli ulcer when they go into those areas is quite important.
Thank you very much. It's Paul Johnson from Melbourne. I'm just responding to Bauke. Bauke, I think a lot of patients look at their thing on their skin and they wait about a month because we all get things on our skin and many of them are little staph abscesses, they discharge and we don't do anything. So there's already about a month, and there's some data to support my anecdote here, before they go to the doctor. And the things that really go wrong are when they say to the doctor, I think I've got Buruli ulcer, and the doctor says, nah. So I would not discourage testing. I think maybe if the laboratory is struggling, what we should be looking at is automation so that they can get through the samples. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Great, thanks.
I'll just use this. Thank you, everyone, for the... I think we'll wrap up the first session because lunch is basically now. On behalf of Clare and I, as the chairs, thank you for a very informative first session and obviously all the work you guys do in this space. Really appreciate it, and thank you for the invitation, Tim. So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Could you please join me once again in thanking our chairs and all speakers in this morning's session?